Hey, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. Good to have you tonight. I have been telling you something that I am ashamed to say was completely false. I've been telling you that the Murdaugh murders case had everything, that it absolutely included all there was to possibly be included. But it turns out I was wrong. Fortunately, that one thing was added today. The one thing that the case was missing. It now even has a dead chicken involved. That's actually part of the case now. So let's get into today because it was wild. It was really, really interesting. You are going to want to hear everything about it. If you aren't up on the case, I'll give you the 20-second overview. Alex Murdaugh is a now disbarred South Carolina lawyer accused of killing his wife Maggie and his son Paul, who was 22. He didn't have any good reason for it. Not that there is ever a good reason for killing your wife and son, but according to the prosecution, he had a really super bad reason, which was just to draw attention away from the financial crimes he had committed. And he is accused of 99 of those. So this is no small thing in terms of financial crimes. But what he's on trial for right now is 2 murders, his wife and his son. Today was absolutely filled with tears. Alex Murdaugh cried buckets. And this was no Amber Heard kind of thing where everybody's out there going, is he crying? Was that a tear? I didn't really see any tears. Was that crying? None of that. Alex Murdaugh was really, truly upset. He cried when they showed pictures of the bodies, when they talked about his 911 call, when they talked about the first responders arriving at the scene. It seemed, frankly, quite sincere, the way that somebody would actually respond. So to me, it seemed realistic. The day also had tons of Keystone Cop claims from the defense. If you don't know the Keystone Cops, that comes from black and white movie days, and they were totally inept, incompetent police officers who were running around doing the wrong thing all the time and acting silly. And that is what the defense is saying, is that these are a bunch of yahoos running around messing up the scene. So let's get into what happened today. We started off, first witness, brand new out of the box, was Sergeant Daniel Green from the Colleton County Sheriff's Department. One of the points that the prosecution tried to make today was that both Maggie and Paul were clearly dead, as in holes in their heads, clearly dead, and yet Alex Murdaugh kept asking if they were dead. Now, the suggestion from the prosecution was that would be weird, that would be really strange to ask that. I wasn't really as convinced, because it did seem to me like there is that thing about, in grief, the very first stage is denial. And so I can see him, maybe they're not dead. Maybe there's something they can do. And you even hear him say, when will the ambulance get here? When will someone help them? And so I wasn't as sure that that was the point that the prosecution wanted it to be. Now, there was also a lot of talk today about water around Paul's body. And this first witness, Daniel Green, said there was not just a little bit, a lot of water around Paul's body. And he even testified that he didn't recall if it was raining that evening, but it was not caused by rain. There was an objection by that from Dick Harpootlian, the attorney. And I thought, frankly, I might have sustained that, but the judge did not, so let him go on with that. But the water evidence was sort of, I'm not sure it really went anywhere. I'll explain why. But my thought was maybe the point about the water was that Paul was cleaning out according to Dick Harpootlian, Paul was maybe cleaning out the kennels where the dogs stayed, and that he was using water to clean them out. The suggestion may have been from the prosecution that Alex was trying to clean up the scene. If so, he did a really poor job, because according to everybody there was blood everywhere, all around the body. So I don't think that was very successful, if that was something that they tried. Now, everybody talked about when they showed up at the scene, and I'm talking about the police officers, they weren't particularly worried. They didn't go in hot, by which they by which they meant they didn't come out with guns just to protect themselves, drawn guns, looking around for perpetrators. They weren't worried that a shooter was still there. And the reason why was frankly a little vague to me. They said it seemed like, Green did, it seemed like Murdaugh had already been there a while. But meanwhile, on the 911 call, you hear Murdaugh arguing with the dispatcher about whether he needs to go get a gun because he's frightened. So I don't know. I was surprised. I think if I had been there, I think I would have gone in hot. I don't know that I would have trusted that it was all okay. So then there was also talk about the boating accident. Of course, one of the issues that the prosecution wants to raise is that Alec immediately said, I think this is because of the boating accident. And he talked about that right away. Now, you could see that one of two different ways. One way you could say, okay, the reason he's talking about the boating accident is to throw off the police so they don't blame him. But you also could say, maybe the reason he's talking about the boating accident is because he thinks it's connected. Here's the way the evidence came out. That Alec talked about the reason he thought was his son's boating accident. Here's what he actually said. My son was in a boat wreck months back. He's been getting threats. Most of it's been benign stuff we didn't take serious. He's been getting punched. I really wonder, what is that? I know that's what it is. So that's what he said, immediately raising a lot of questions like, he's been getting punched. What was that about? I would like to know more about that. Was that more than once, a single time? And I assume that's why Buster, his other son, is on the witness list, is that Buster is going to come in and talk about what were the threats, what was the getting punched, and how was this all happening? There may be evidence from the phone about the threats, but that's clearly something that the defense ought to bring forward. That seems like an important point if that's really true. But one of the things that I thought did hurt the prosecution a little bit was that the Sergeant Green said he asked, that Alex said repeatedly, this is about the son's boating accident. And then you heard on the body cam that when the supervising lieutenant gets there, he says, hey, the guy over here on the ground, Paul, he's the one who was involved in the boat wreck. Do you remember that? And the supervisor says, yes. So in other words, it was a pretty huge deal. It wasn't like it was some small event that Alex Murdaugh was just sort of pulling out of nowhere. Then there was repeated testimony from lots of different witnesses today that at the scene that night, Alex Murdaugh had no visible tears. I don't know what the deal was that night, but he certainly had the visible tears today. That definitely happened. I thought it was pretty clear. They did say that he was distraught, that he was very upset, and that he was breathing heavily, but did not ask for medical help or medical care. There was also some discussion about his having a shotgun, and I'll sort of give you an overview of how it kind of came out today. Alex Murdaugh clearly states, on the body cam, they didn't show everyone in the world the body cam. The jury got to see the body cam, but it was not broadcast. People in the audience there in the courtroom did not get to see it. And so all we had was audio. That obviously gives us some disadvantage, but I thought like it was pretty clear. One of the things that happens when they get there is Alex Murdaugh says, I've got a gun. It's over there against the truck, leaning against the truck. And then Sergeant Green takes it and secures it. He even showed the audience this gun that he took and secured in his vehicle. And he said he did that because Murdaugh seemed to be very nervous and upset. And so he wanted to hide the gun or get it away out of the scene. So Murdaugh has this gun leaning up against the truck. And before that happens, you hear a colloquy, especially when we got to the 911 call, about whether or not Alex Murdaugh needs to go get a gun at the house in order to protect himself. And Alex is saying, I need to do that. 911 operator saying, don't do that. Don't go get a gun. Don't do that. And they go back and forth about this. And finally, it seemed like Alex said, okay, I won't. Then he hangs up to talk to his brother. So then the question is, the question I had, no one raised it, but I had this question. Well, where'd that gun leaning against the truck come from? However, it wasn't a huge problem, I don't think, for the defense. And the reason it wasn't is because it was loaded with two different kinds of shot, one of which was inappropriate and couldn't have been fired out of the gun or might have exploded. And there was a 12 gauge shotgun, and loaded in there were 12 and 16 gauge shot. The 12, fine, but the 16, not so much. And so, and the witnesses admitted, yeah, that might explode. That could be dangerous. So it doesn't seem like it would be a good idea to fire that. So the argument that Dick Harpootlian made in opening was the reason that it was misloaded is that Alex Murdaugh was a nervous wreck and he messed up. He knows guns. He would never have done that naturally. He normally would have put the correct one in. One of the things I thought was interesting is there were attempts definitely to say that Alex Murdaugh was acting strange at the scene by using words like he was nervous and he was upset. I thought, though, as I listened to the video, that that's sort of just words you put with it. It's more how you read it. And granted, I didn't have the advantage of seeing it like they did. I'm only hearing it. But my words would be that he was in extreme distress, that he was hysterical. And so those kind of shade it in a different direction. But in any event, he was upset. And now we get into the question of what happened to the scene and what did the officers do at the scene. According to what the police officer said, and this is Sergeant Green, he said there were fresh sets of tire tracks, many tire tracks, more than just Alex Murdaugh pulled up. And Alex Murdaugh says, I just came in the once, which means he probably didn't go back and get the gun again. Leading me, sorry about the interruption, again, leading me to ask a question, where did this 12 gauge leaning up against the car come from? I don't know the answer to that. But the fresh sets of tire tracks, there was no real attempt to keep those preserved. And I'm going to get into that when I talk about the cross-examination. Now, Alec called his brother. Brother comes, hangs out with him, as you well might do in such a situation. And now for the dead chicken. I told you we now have everything. We have a dead chicken in the case. There was in the video a dead chicken on top of the dog crates. Now apparently this ties into that video that we're waiting for from Paul. I don't know for sure we'll see it, but we'll for sure hear it, I think. And in the background, you can apparently hear Alec talking to Maggie about a dead chicken. And the one on top of the coop of the dog kennel, the dog crate, is supposedly that chicken. That's the chicken. The reason that testimony is important, apparently, or that video is important, according to what the prosecution said, is because just the mere fact that you can hear Alec's voice. So the prosecution is saying he was at the scene. He was right there. And because he was at the scene, we know he was at the scene because he's talking about something that's right there, a chicken. And you can hear it in the back during this video. So we know he was there at the scene. He says he wasn't. Critically important point. I did wonder, what if Maggie had him on speakerphone or was even doing FaceTime to show him the dead chicken? I don't know what the defense argument will be, but that's why the dead chicken is important. And probably it's one of the first cases ever to have a dead chicken as an important piece of evidence. When he got to the cross-examination, Dick Harpootlian had a little trouble with some of the audio and some of the video. He seemed to have a little trouble with that, but he was overall pretty brilliant. He was very Dick Harpootlian, as we've heard him described, very much a Matlock kind of a lawyer. First thing he did was say, isn't it true you haven't called me back? And he basically was saying, you, Green, you're a prosecution witness. You're against us, which I think probably most people would have already understood. But he talked about that initially. He also went straight to whether or not Paul might have been cleaning out the dog kennel, saying that the dogs might have pooped in there and maybe he was just cleaning it out, and that would explain all this water around the body. But I'm going to get to the witness who kind of undermined this for the prosecution, in my opinion. He also talked about the shotgun with the 16 and 12 gauge and that it wouldn't fire. One of the points that he made that I don't yet understand related to a shot being fired up at Paul, fired upward. And I don't understand what the significance of that is, but I'm looking forward to everybody talking about that through the trial. And he talked a lot about the multiple tire tracks. Why were there so many tire tracks there, and why did law enforcement not preserve them? Now, what Green said is not my job. That's not what I do. I just get there, kind of preserve the scene, and then investigators come in. So this is not my job. So he's not the only person, but he clearly saw the tracks. He admitted he saw the tracks, and he didn't do anything to fix them. So that was a real problem, I thought. Now, they didn't take pictures of them, specific pictures. You can kind of see them in the video. He didn't tell SLED, which is South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, he didn't say, here, look at these tire tracks. So Dick Harpootlian sort of attacked him on that, saying, you know, you didn't really make a real effort to do any of this, to do the things that would have preserved it. Why didn't you do that? Now, there was also discussion about footprints behind the trailer. Somebody found, but then people walked all over the area, and apparently nobody did anything to preserve these footprints. That's going to be huge. That a defense lawyer needs to. I remember specifically one of my law professors saying that he had a former student who was a criminal defense lawyer, and he was brilliant at it because he could make a mountain out of a molehill. He could take the smallest little thing and make it into a massive issue. And that's what a defense, and he would say that's why he's such a good defense lawyer, because that's what he can do. He can take a smallest issue and make it huge. And that's exactly what he's doing. What are these footprints? What are all these tire tracks? Again, pointing to more than one perpetrator, because the weakest point for the state, in my opinion, is that 2 different guns were used to kill Maggie and Paul. And that just seems so unlikely that you go and you get one gun, kill somebody, go, I didn't like that gun. Put that back, get another, kill somebody. It just seems unusual. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. You would think that would be 2 different people. So that's one of the weaknesses, and Dick Harpootlian is going straight at that weakness, straight into it. He also talked about the various people, because there were at least 2 who went into the feed room. Now, the cardinal rule is, he said, you don't go into the scene. You keep it preserved for the investigators, who are not you and who are still coming. And why not put something around it? Why not preserve it? But instead you see 2 deputies go in there. He talked about just at length about the destruction of the scene. They didn't put anything on their feet to avoid contaminating it. They walked around in there. He talked about there being brain matter in there, and they're walking on top of it. It was rather gruesome, frankly. And he said there are bloody prints. They could come from anybody. You don't even know who did any of this. And you messed up the scene. That was his argument. Now, on redirect, they tried to talk about, look, that's not your job. But the problem wasn't whether it was his job. The problem was whether it was contaminated, whether it was messed up so much it couldn't be fixed, and whether or not what could have saved Alex Murdaugh was never found because they didn't bother to look for it. That is a problem, I think, if they didn't document that. There's going to be a lot the defense lawyer can do with that. As far as Alex Murdaugh's demeanor, my view was, if his reaction was acting, he has seriously missed his calling, because he may be the world's greatest actor. He was, in my view, really pretty good. I was amazed. He seemed very real, both in his reactions in the scene and also, I thought, in his reactions today. So the prosecution will have to deal with that. We've got many more days of evidence. So I don't think that by any means. Somebody asked, what are you calling it on, Lee? No, I'm not calling it. I'm not calling it. But I did think that there are things that the prosecution is going to have to deal with. That's always the way it is in any case. So there were then lots more people who came in and talked about another deputy who went into the feed room. One thing that I thought was odd, they mentioned how many casings were around both victims, but each one only had one main shot. I don't know if that's true. That was just something stated on the body cam, and it seemed so odd. I was really intrigued by that. There was also discussion about, and at least the one officer who admitted when he went into that feed room, he might have disturbed some microscopic things like DNA and blood. So they also went all around Maggie's body, even though it wasn't their job, to mark like where bullets were. And they said, well, we're just getting the scene set up, trying to help. And Dick Harpootlian said, well, that's not your job. Why are you trying to help? What's your point? And you're messing things up while you're doing it. Everybody said there was no blood on Alex Murdaugh and that he was upset. Those are obviously points that the defense wants to make. They played the 911 call. Alex Murdaugh clearly very upset. It was a very disturbing call. He also told law enforcement, Chief Barry McCroy told law enforcement about tire marks that were coming out of a lean-to garage that was 20 or 30 feet away, but there wasn't a vehicle in there. And he said, preserve those. But apparently nobody did. There wasn't tape set up to preserve it. Fire rescue, official cars came in, and it was all messed up. He did feel like there was one section of tire marks that were preserved, and I guess we'll hear more about what those were and whose they were later. And now we get to Deputy Jason Chapman. He was the one who, in my view, killed the cleanup theory. What I mean by that is, remember all that water around Paul? And I guess that what the prosecution was trying to say is that Alex Murdaugh was trying to clean up the scene, not very effectively, since in fact there was a lot of blood there, but that so he tried to clean that up. I don't think that would work because Deputy Jason Chapman said that Paul's clothes were wet underneath from the ground up, not as if he had been sprayed with water. So it seemed to me like that undermined it, but that might not have been the point of the water. We don't really know yet what the point of the water is. We're sort of waiting on that. Now, they talked about throughout the day Murdaugh's distress, and it was different words that were used. It all depends on whether you believe Alex Murdaugh, right? If you believe him, his distress is very real because 2 members of his family have been killed. If you don't believe Alex Murdaugh, then he's faking it and he's trying to set this up in order to protect himself from what's happening today, which is prosecution for double crimes. Now, I wanted to throw out a couple of, I wanted to answer a couple of questions if anybody had any. And let's take a quick look. If you have any, by the way, if you have a question, be sure to put question marks at the front because I look through really quickly and sometimes miss it. Great, Martha. She'd be an awesome defense lawyer. Just ask my husband. That's right. People who can make a mountain out of a molehill. You have missed your calling. You should have been a defense lawyer. That's what you do. And it is important. Somebody asking, Denise was asking me about if I had an opinion yet. And I'm not going to do that. I really do want to hear more evidence. I want to at least get through the state's evidence, right? Hear absolutely everything they have, because this is a horrific crime. This isn't just little. This isn't just something small. So if Alex Murdaugh did this, by all means, there needs to be recompense. He needs to go to jail for the rest of his life. There's not a death penalty at issue, but at least that. So thanks for watching. Tune in tomorrow. I will be back for more on the Alex Murdaugh case, and I will talk to you then.